the idea here is the great apostasy is a narrative about the history, the ecclesiastical history of Christianity. What I mean by that, for people who don't like the big words, basically the history of the structure of the church's institution. First of all, we posit, and the Catholics posit this as well, that you need to have an ultimate central authority in order to even have an institution that has any sort of continuity, because otherwise it'll break up. And not only that, we argue that that Peter held that ultimate central authority. The keys of the kingdom is understood by, and remember, this entire debate was about Latter-day Saint claims about the great apostasy. So first I have to explain, what are our claims? Our claims are that the priesthood authority, the ultimate priesthood authority, the keys of the kingdom, who holds those today? President Dallin H. Oaks. Okay, who held those in the original church? Peter. Peter held the fullness of the keys of the kingdom. Okay. Now, we believe that that is necessary to hold together the church.
Mormonism with the Murph, where Latter-day Saint explores church history and the church's truth claims. Hello everyone, welcome back to my channel, Mormonism with the Murph, where Latter-day Saint explores the church's history and truth claims. And I have joining me today Jacob Hansen of Thoughtful Faith, and we're going to have a chat and a discussion, a bit of a recap of the debate he did just before Christmas with Joe Heschemeyer, a Catholic apologist, on the Great Apostasy. We did plan to do this about a month ago, but I inconveniently got in a car crash and that delayed things, flipping Irishman. Had too many Guinnesses. But no, I'm on the mend, but yeah, it's nice to have you on, Jacob, and to collaborate again.
Well, it's nice to be here. Thanks for having me, Stephen.
Yeah. So maybe you could just begin by giving a brief overview of the debate topic. Where was it? I think it was Salt Lake, wasn't it? And
yeah, it was near Salt Lake. It was in Draper. But
okay. I really don't know. I've heard of Draper, but I do not know where that is. But anyway,
it's like, you know, the Salt Lake Valley has all these little towns that are all kind of part of Salt Lake, but you know, anyone would be like, oh yeah, that's Salt Lake, but it's like, no, that's actually Draper or Murray or all these other little towns. So, but it's all part of that Salt Lake Valley. So it's kind of the far southern end of the Salt Lake Valley.
Okay. And it seemed like a really big event. Like, it looked like there was loads of people there. I know you had some audio issues as well. But talk about like why you chose the debate topic, and talk about the debate, how you think it went, and what was sort of your main argument that you made and sort of Joe's main argument.
Yeah, so the debate was on the subject of the great apostasy, specifically if there are good reasons to believe LDS claims about a great apostasy. And so it actually got started when I was actually there was another person who was thinking about debating me on this topic that was a Catholic. And
not Trent Horn?
Not Trent Horn. Cameron wanted me to debate a different Catholic. It's actually an ex-LDS guy who's now a Catholic, on a different subject. And I said, well, I don't know if I want to debate that topic. How about the subject of the great apostasy? I would be down to debate that. He didn't want to do the great apostasy debate. And then, so I think through one thing or another, Cameron really wanted me to do a debate on his channel. And so it ended up being that Joe Heschemeyer was like, yeah, I'll do a great apostasy debate. Or maybe I reached out. I can't remember. But we ended up deciding on this topic. And then, yeah, we scheduled it. And they actually, originally we were going to do it in Texas, but then they ended up, they were kind of having trouble finding a venue down where Cameron is. And so I was like, why don't I bring these guys to Utah? I bet I could find a venue. And I could kind of like spend a few days showing them around, kind of, you know, introduce them to the Latter-day Saints. And so
Salt Lake City's really nice as well. There's so many great historic sites to show them.
Yep, exactly. And I ended up getting connected with someone that was involved with the church's PR department, who gave us like a tour of a bunch of different things. So we got to go to see the tabernacle. We got a private organ performance from the
that's cool.
head guy of the tabernacle choir, like the main organist.
Wow.
Which was incredible. In the tabernacle, he told us all the history and stuff. We got to go to the family history center. They showed us around that. Went to not Welfare Square, but the Central Storehouse, the Bishop Central Storehouse, which was incredible. So we kind of got this cool, like, tour put on to kind of show them. And Cameron he's 500,000 subscribers, and he comes from an evangelical like Protestant background, and so he's pretty hostile towards Latter-day Saints, or at least has been. And I wanted to kind of be like, dude, you don't even know us. Like you're someone who grew up in Texas. You don't really know us that well. So I wanted to give them the chance to kind of get to know us, to be like, hey, wait a minute. These people are actually like really nice. And they're not like a satanic dark cult. Like these people are literally distributing food all over the world and providing educational opportunities and helping people learn about their family history. And you can at least respect that. So anyway, we did that little tour. They did find a Catholic church that agreed to host us. And we ended up having about somewhere around 800 people in live attendance in front of us in the audience.
Wow. Most probably being Latter-day Saints, I imagine.
Actually, I think it was pretty balanced. I do think there were probably a little bit more Latter-day Saints, but that Catholic diocese, they're big into like Joe Heschemeyer, and he had a lot of fans there. So, they invited a ton of Catholics to come and watch the debate as well. And if you're a Catholic living in Utah, like the subject of the Great Apostasy is kind of like the subject. So they were very interested. They were interested. So anyway, it was a cool thing. We got together and and then we did the debate.
Because it's a very core foundational issue, the apostasy. It's very much at the center of both Latter-day Saint claims, because if there is no apostasy, there'd be no restoration. But for Catholics, it's also very important to them that there was no apostasy, because their basic claim is that Peter had sort of the apostolic, the keys of the kingdom, that central authority. It was given to the Bishop of Rome and then passed down from there. So they would claim there was no apostasy, no loss of authority.
Correct.
So what was sort of your main argument for any listeners who missed the debate, sort of against that claim of, oh no, there's never been that loss of institutional authority, that jurisdiction for the entire church?
Well, that's the thing, is actually most people don't understand what the heck we're talking about when we talk about the Great Apostasy. Even Joe Heschemeyer, who's done entire like hour-and-a-half videos on his channel, if you watch what he says the Great Apostasy is, he says Latter-day Saints believe the bride of Christ died, that there was no more Christianity, and that the great martyrs of history, they weren't really Christians. They were just pretending to be Christians. And so it's like, no, Joe, that isn't what we mean by it.
No, definitely not.
So the Great Apostasy, the very first thing, if you're going to talk about the Great Apostasy, is you have to get clear on what you're talking about. And there are a few things you have to get clear on. The first thing is what you even mean by the church. Because the church is a word that can point to two different things, just depending on the context. The church can mean the body of sincere believers, like the people who really, truly are trying to follow Jesus Christ. Or it can refer to an institutional structure that governs those believers, right?
Right.
So for Protestants, they don't believe in an institutional structure that governs all believers. Like they don't have any ultimate authority, right? They believe that we all have a priesthood of all believers. And so there isn't an ecclesiastical governing structure for the Protestant movement. They're basically like, I genuinely say this, and I don't mean this as an insult. I mean it as an observation. Protestantism doesn't have a church. Protestantism is a series of Bible study clubs that get together and self-organize in a variety of different ways. And they just and the only thing that unites them is the fact that they say, well, the Bible is our ultimate authority. But the moment you go, okay, well, two people disagree about it, what happens? They split up. And so you just get a new Bible study club. So it's just a bunch of Bible study clubs. It isn't a church in the proper sense as existed in the New Testament. At least that is that. And so if I were talking with a Protestant, that's sort of the argument that I would make, is I'd say, you're not even part of the conversation about what we mean by the apostasy, because you don't even believe in a church as we're talking about it in terms of the Great Apostasy. What the Great Apostasy is, it isn't the loss of all believers. The Great Apostasy is a loss of the fullness of the institution, right? So you don't have the institutional structure that is necessary to preserve institutional integrity. So what you do is once you lose this sort of central authority, then what happens is you get schism and doctrinal drift.
Right.
The analogy, and one last point on this, I know I'm kind of going on, but
I'll keep going.
The best analogy I think to use is the Supreme Court of the United States, right? So you have lower courts, but if there's a dispute amongst the courts, then it gets adjudicated by the Supreme Court, who makes the ultimate decision, right?
The final say.
The final say. If you don't have a final say, if you don't have someone, and it has to be a living authority, right? Then you don't have an ultimate adjudicator. You don't have an ultimate judge to judge between the doctrinal disputes. And what happens then is people divide. They separate into different groups. If you didn't have the Supreme Court in the United States, you'd have different systems of law, and you wouldn't even have one sort of government. You would have different governments. And so
what we schism in a way, sort of disorder or chaos, different interpretations.
Protestantism.
Yeah. Didn't want to say it, but
that's exactly what it is. That's what I call that the Protestant problem.
Right.
And by the way, this isn't something specific to religion. This is a commentary and an understanding about the nature of institutions themselves, right? In a business, for example, if you don't have an ultimate adjudicating authority, then you have all sorts of problems once there's disputes within the business, right? I have a business partnership, and I gave my business partner, we have the same like percentage of ownership and revenue, but he gets one extra like vote. So he can make the ultimate judgment call. Now, why would I do that? It's because it's better that a decision gets made, even if it's a wrong decision, than that no decision gets made at all. Because if we get stuck in gridlock and we both are fighting over it, either one of us has to give in or we separate. It's just the nature of institutions and the nature of authority. One of the things people wrongly assume, and this goes for our own church, is that the prophets have to be infallible. They have to get everything right in order to be authoritative. That's not true. They can make the wrong call, but that still doesn't mean that they don't have the authority to make the call.
Similar to the Supreme Court, you might think a decision or a call they make might be wrong, but they still have that authority to make the call. You're right.
And why do we sustain the Supreme Court of the United States? Why do we respect the institution?
Well,
because if you don't, because the alternative is chaos.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's true. You don't.
I don't have to. I actually found this definition of the Great Apostasy on the church's website, because I know Joe, he quoted one to you, and I actually found it because they have an article on apostasy, then they have one on the Great Apostasy. So I'm just going to read this one to you, because this is sort of goes in line with the way you were sort of defining apostasy, and I think this is sort of the way the church would define apostasy. So it says, following the death of Jesus Christ, wicked people persecuted and killed many church members. Other church members drifted from the principles taught by Jesus Christ and his apostles. The key part here is the apostles were killed, and priesthood authority, including the keys to direct and receive revelation for the church, was taken from the earth. Because the church was no longer led by priesthood authority, error crept into church teachings, good people and much truth remained, but the gospel as established by Jesus Christ was lost. This period is called the Great Apostasy. And I think that's a really good summary, because you talk about after the death of the apostles, that central authority, those priesthood keys were lost, and you were left with local bishops who had sort of regional jurisdiction. I want to talk about the papacy a little bit after, and then sort of doctrinal corruption and drift. And there was so much schism in the early centuries of the church, but the church would still see it as there were still good people that had a portion of the truth. They still had the Bible, but that central authority, that priesthood authority, and some doctrinal corruption was what necessitated, for there to be a restoration.
Correct. And it's important to understand, because some people are like, well, when did the Great Apostasy begin? That's kind of like some people say, well, when the central authority was lost. I'd say Yes and no. So the apostasy, most people, when they think of the apostasy, they think of like error and incorrect teachings, right? Like false ideas entering the church.
Hmm.
And that is something that happened over time. There's the schism and doctrinal drift element of it. But I say that the apostasy was the inevitable consequence of the loss of central and ultimate authority, right? It's
Right.
sort of like saying our system of government, if we lose the Supreme Court, is going to degenerate and break off and end up with a bunch of contradictory systems of law and governance within the country if we lose the Supreme Court. So when did it happen? We can say, well, it's when you lost the Supreme Court. But the day the Supreme Court goes away, like we lost the Supreme Court today, nothing would change in our country legally.
Yeah, it wouldn't happen
until
overnight.
there's a dispute.
Right.
What was that?
Yeah, it wouldn't happen overnight. It'd be a gradual process.
That's exactly correct. And so we have to remember that we're talking about an institutional structure. What happened to that institutional structure over time? And you see things, I think and people want to say, well, what is the evidence of this schism and doctrinal drift? Well, the biggest one, the big central one, I didn't really bring it up in the debate because I didn't want to derail the debate, is the doctrine of the Trinity. Okay.
Right.
Once you realize that the doctrine of Trinity is not found in the Bible, it's contradicted by the Bible, and that it was brought into the church as a dogma that every Christian had to uphold, even though it went contrary to the apostles and wasn't revealed by God, and actually runs contrary to the revelations of God, you go, okay, something went wrong.
Like,
yeah. So we got off the rails here. Something happened. And then you watch as over time, schism and doctrinal drift continues to grow until all of a sudden you have Mary is being assumed into heaven. And if you don't believe that, you go to hell and the Pope is infallible. Like,
and very core to the claim of Catholicism is that that central authority and those priesthood keys were given from Peter to the Bishop of Rome, and that there's been a succession since then. But you made the argument in the debate, and it seems to be the consensus of historians and New Testament scholars, that the Pope, the Bishop of Rome, having that central authority seems to be a later development, almost coming in centuries later. Maybe talk about that, because that sort of, I guess, would undermine the Catholic position.
Here's the thing. I'll give you guys the summary if you don't want to go and dig into all the books and history like I have. Here's what happened when the apostles all died. Okay, what the apostles did is they established local churches in different places that they had been. Okay, these are known as the apostolic churches. They were in places like Smyrna, they were in Alexandria, they were in Ephesus, they were in Rome. There were a whole bunch of them. In all of these areas, they appointed a local bishop to be the overseer. Now, it actually isn't totally out of line with kind of the way that we think of it today, right? Where a local leader is a bishop or a stake president. We'll just wrap that all into one and we'll call it a bishop, right? It's the person who's over the local area. All right. So you have these different local
authority
areas
in that jurisdiction for that local area, for that region.
Exactly. And it's totally legit. They totally had that, right? However, those local bishops were still subject. They weren't the highest authority in the church. The highest authority in the church were the apostles, right? That's why they would write letters to the bishops. Say, hey guys, like, knock it off. You need to cooperate and do things the way that we're supposed to. This is a very similar structure to what we have in the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints today. You have general authorities, right? And you have local authorities. What happens when the general authorities are gone? What happens when the ultimate adjudicating authority, the Supreme Court, as it were, is gone? Well, all you're left with are local authorities. And so that was what was left. And the local authorities were like, all right, let's try and like hold this together. Now, a good argument that they make, well, then was it intended to or not? I'm not going to argue right now for the intent as to like, why did God let this happen? That actually, I think, is the strongest argument that they can make against the claim, is that God would never allow this to happen. But that's a separate subject,
right?
Which we could get into later. Just right now, I just want to talk about the history. This is what happened. What happened was you had an ultimate adjudicating authority, and then all you had were local adjudicating authorities. Now, they did a pretty good job of holding together. They tried their best to say, okay, we all have kind of come from this same single tradition, and you had a collection of bishops who tried to work together to keep things together. But over time, you ended up getting these differences of opinions between the bishops. Okay. And now, well, how do you adjudicate that? Right? That's the problem. It's the Protestant problem. They had the exact same problem as the Protestant problem. You have a bunch of equal authorities.
Right. They're on the same level. So who is the final say? Exactly.
And the thing is, you can see this in the history. Nobody treated the Bishop of Rome as anything more than a prominent local bishop. Rome was a very prominent church. It was one of the main ones, maybe the biggest one. And but like there were stories like Victor the First tried to excommunicate people, and they're like, no. Like, oh, okay. It's like, well, if you're, it'd be like President Oaks excommunicating someone, and then all of us just being like, nah. It's like, that isn't how an ultimate authority works. They call the great councils. In the councils, like, they aren't even called by the Bishop of Rome. They're called by the emperor. And
yeah, like the Council of Nicaea was summoned by the emperor for all the bishops to come and attend. It wasn't the Bishop of Rome who put it out there for all of them to come.
Yeah, so if they want to make the claim that the Bishop of Rome was and not only that, they claim that he was the ultimate infallible adjudicator of the entire church from the beginning. And it's like, there's no evidence of that. What it does show, though, and this is what happened historically, what happens in the history is that you have these bishops that are trying to kind of resolve things through councils. Now, granted, Rome, have you ever been on a hike and like, no one's the leader of the hike? But let's say there's a guy there. He's a big, strong guy. He knows the area well. He was friends with the park ranger. And as you guys are going on this long like hike, he kind of is leading the way, right? Well, right on. That's kind of what the church in Rome was. But and at first it's like, he's like, all right, well, let's go this way. And I'm like, okay, yeah, let's go this way. So it's the early churches would more or less sort of look to Rome as a good example. And they'd talk about Rome as like a great church. But then what happens is over time, you can imagine you're in the camp and he goes, hey, you need to make breakfast for all of us tomorrow. You look at the guy and you're like, what? He's like, yeah, I'm in charge. I'm the leader. It's like, and we could use the line, who died and made you Pope, right? And so, yeah, over history, what happens is that all of a sudden and remember, is it a coincidence that it was in the capital of the Roman Empire, in the Roman Church, that the head honcho just happened to pop up, who, by the way, was like right there with the emperor, who also is trying to consolidate power? Like, that's coincidence. Convenient. Very, very convenient there. And the Eastern churches, eventually, once he started to kind of like really flex his power, the Eastern churches were like, no, like, we're not doing that. Now, at first, there was kind of this, there was a time of a little bit of like a power dispute where they're trying to hold together. Eventually, the Bishop of Rome, in the Great Schism in 10 something, that's kind of where it really comes to a head. There always was kind of a tension between the Eastern bishops and Rome. And then eventually the Roman bishop is just sort of, and they're just like, no, we're not like on your team anymore. We're out of communion. Like, you're a rogue bishop. And when people want to ask me, like, when did the Roman church begin? I actually like to say at that time, because that was when Rome broke away from the Orthodox bishops. If you were going to say, what is the church that existed after the death of the apostles, it was actually the Orthodox Church. It was the collection of bishops that were all seen as equals trying to hold the thing together. Now, Orthodoxy has the same problem, though, and they've split a bunch of times. I call them Protestants light, because they still don't have an ultimate adjudicator. The Roman Church, the reason that it's become so powerful and so, well, mainly because it was connected to the Roman Empire, but in addition to that, the Roman Church had a central adjudicator. That's why it was able to hold itself together. And it wasn't like other churches kept breaking off into these different schismatic groups. That's why even the Eastern Orthodox Church, granted, they also had the Muslims come in and basically kill them all, which was a bit of a problem. Yeah. But the Eastern churches, to this day, the vast majority, so Constantinople was seen in the Eastern Church as kind of the first among equals, like kind of not the ultimate authority, but kind of the leader of the group. And right now, the majority of Orthodox Christians are not even in communion with Constantinople, because the Russian Orthodox Church has broken communion with Constantinople, and the majority of Eastern Orthodox people are in Russia.
Yeah.
So it's like, it's again, it's funny. I want to look at the Protestants and be like, you guys believe that the vast majority of Christians today are following a false gospel and a leader who is leading people to hell by telling them that if they don't agree with his infallible dictates, that they go to hell. Like, but you're going to say there wasn't a great apostasy? Even the vast majority of Christians are following a false gospel. Same with Orthodox. It's like, Orthodox, you guys believe that the vast majority of Christians aren't even a member of your church.
So before we talk about Protestantism, because I do want to bring up some of the things that they might use to defend that there wasn't a great apostasy, I have here in my notes, like, I think it was around the 4th to 5th centuries. That's when like popes like Leo the First started to like assert authority over other bishops. And then obviously you had the Great Schism. And then it wasn't until Vatican I was it like official that like papal primacy and like infallibility. But there was that papal sort of supremacy. Would you say that was somewhat codified around the schism?
Yeah. So, again, I like to use the analogy just to help people understand it, because the history, you get into these big terms and all this stuff that, papal bulls and all this other stuff. Here's a very simple way to think about it when you boil down the history to your average person. Okay. It's the leader of the hike analogy. Yes. Even very early on, Rome was seen as a prominent church, a good example of orthodoxy. It was kind of like, it was someone that people could look to as a great example of the Orthodox church.
Almost like Tulare seems looking at Salt Lake City as sort of church headquarters in a way.
Yeah, something like that, right? Like it's or you could look, let's say we're in South America, and you could look at the church in Brazil and be like, that's a good example of the church. There's lots of members, it's thriving, yada, yada, yada. But does that mean that Brazil is in charge of all the other churches? And, in all of like the Brazilian saints are like in charge of the rest? Like, no. And that their like highest area authority there is like in charge of everyone else? Like, no, that isn't how it works. There's the word is jurisdiction. Okay. And that's the big battle between the Orthodox and the Roman Church. The Roman Church says, I have jurisdiction over the whole world. I'm the ultimate infallible adjudicator for all Christian believers everywhere. And the Orthodox are like, bro, you are just a bishop. Like, calm down. All right.
And they're claiming that it was that way from the beginning, from Peter to the first bishop of Rome, when it seems that this was very much a later development.
Yeah. And there's no evidence to support that in fact, they say that Peter was the first bishop of Rome. There's no evidence that, like, Peter was an apostle. He wasn't a bishop. And there's no evidence that he ran the church in Rome. He died in Rome. At least that's the best historical understanding. And like what happened is that there's these disputes among them. And there's always a problem, because amongst all the bishops, they're like, we have these disagreements, but we like don't have a way to like adjudicate them. And so it's creating this tension and these like problems in the church. So they get together in these councils, they vote on things, people kind of, they negotiate, and it's sort of this, but there's a problem inherent in the structure. Like, we don't have an ultimate adjudicator. So how do we kind of keep this thing together? And Rome, and this is where the Catholics make a great argument. And Joe makes this argument in his book, Pope Peter, and I think he does a great job. What he does, he points out that they looked at it and they went, wait a minute, if we study the scriptures, Peter does hold, like, in the early church, was there an ultimate like authority? Was there someone at the top? And there was. It was Peter. Peter was actually given authority by Jesus. And if you look in, again, I refer to Joe's book, he makes this case that like Peter held a unique office. He was the president of the church, as we would say it.
Right.
It's very clear that he has more authority than the other apostles do. Now, the bishop in Rome is like, hey, obviously I'm kind of butchering this, but more or less something like this happens. Hey guys, Peter died in our town. He's the guy who appointed our bishop. We're in charge now. And so they kind of like that was their argument. They said, we are Peter's see. He was the guy who appointed us bishop. But it's like, bro, he appointed you a bishop, not an apostle. And
Right.
so the and so all of this is them essentially reasserting that. But if you go back to Linus, Linus was the first bishop. He was the bishop in Rome basically at the time that Peter died there. Okay. Or at least it seems that way. And then after him was Clement, and there were others. There's no indication that they received jurisdiction over the entire church. They were just a local bishop. They even understood themselves to just be a local bishop. So it's like,
Right. And sort of connecting the dots, like this seems to undermine certainly the claims of Catholicism, because you're claiming that there was this central authority that Peter had, the keys of the kingdom over the entire church. But you're saying that the claims of the papacy was sort of a later development. So were the priesthood keys passed on? And if they weren't passed on to the Bishop of Rome, that would certainly undermine the claims of Catholicism. Now, one thing that he brought up, and you did a long 2-hour live stream clarifying your position, because he made the accusation that you were sort of dishonest. You were debating more about the papacy, and this debate was about the great apostasy. So maybe in a nutshell, explain why you went that route, and why you felt like addressing the papal claims would apply to the apostasy generally.
yeah. Actually, could I share with you
Yeah.
some slides here, or would I just share that on my screen, or should I send them to you? What would be easiest?
You can share it on yours.
Okay,
I've
let me
just
do this
enabled it
real
there.
quick.
Yeah.
All right, let me pull it up here.
Oh yeah, I remember these slides
Um,
from the live stream you did with Joe and Cameron, which I
yeah, this
recommend to people. Watch your debate. But I thought the two conversations you had with Joe and Cameron after, and on Steve's show with Colby and I can't remember the other guy that was on with you. I thought they were really good for you clarifying your position. I think you articulated it really well. But anyone who's missed it, we'll sum it up here.
Yeah. So the idea here is the great apostasy is a narrative about the history, the ecclesiastical history of Christianity. What I mean by that, for people who don't like the big words, basically the history of the structure of the church's institution. Okay.
Right.
So that's what it's about. It's not a like event per se. It's more like a narrative about history. It's like, this is our version of what happened. Okay. Now, first of all, we posit, and the Catholics posit this as well, that you need to have an ultimate central authority in order to even have an institution that has any sort of continuity, because otherwise it'll break up. And not only that, we argue that Peter held that ultimate central authority. The keys of the kingdom is understood by, and remember, this entire debate was about Latter-day Saint claims about the great apostasy. So first I have to explain, what are our claims? Our claims are that the priesthood authority, the ultimate priesthood authority, the keys of the kingdom, who holds those today? President Dallin H. Oaks. Okay. Who held those in the original church? Peter. Peter held the fullness of the keys of the kingdom. Okay. Now, we believe that that is necessary to hold together the church. So first of all, Protestants don't even believe in that. So Protestants, you're just out of the equation. Okay. And the Orthodox, they're the other factor in this equation. They don't believe in a central authority. Well, I'm going to put it this way. They do, but it's by vote or by ecumenical council decree. And that's very
Right.
different. It's a very
Always like the
different.
majority wins.
Exactly. And so the question is, but here's the thing. Let's say first of all, is truth determined by the majority? No. And even in an institutional structure where you have a voting system amongst equals, well, what if you disagree with the equals? You have just as much authority to say they're wrong, and I'm going to go continue the true thing over here, because they have no more authority than I do. And so you have the schism problem. You need to
Right.
have something that is old. By the way, this is also very helpful for Latter-day Saints to understand. This is why we sustain the prophet, even if we think the prophet could be mistaken, Because if you don't sustain the prophet, then and people don't do that, then the institution falls apart. Now, granted, if you think that the institution's all corrupt and falling apart, then yeah, then you stop sustaining it. But to sustain the prophet is to maintain the institutional integrity of the institution. Okay, even if you don't think they're making a perfect call. But if you honestly think they're leading us astray and are going to take, the plane down, like just because the pilot is flying off course a little bit, it's like, it's all right. We'll still get to our destination. Like they'll course correct. They'll figure it out. We'll arrive there in the end. But if the plane is like going towards the ground and is about to crash into the ground, yeah, you say, I'm out of here. Like, that's fine. All right. Anyway, the point here, the great apostasy, we have to rule out who is even a candidate on Latter-day Saint claims. Well, it can't be the Orthodox. They don't even claim a central authority as we sort of think of it. It can't be the Protestants, obviously. So the only option left is the Catholic Church. It's the papacy, and its claims are a legitimate challenge to this. Okay,
right? Because it's very core to the apostasy, in our understanding, is the loss of the priesthood keys.
Exactly, and what we mean by that, the Catholics claim essentially what we claim. They claim that there is an ultimate central adjudicator. And that is at the heart of the institution. Remember, if you don't have the Catholic Church, or if you don't have the priesthood keys, if you don't have the papacy, you don't have the Catholic Church. Same with us. If we don't have the prophet, if we don't have the keys, we don't have the church. It's just the way it is. It's an essential characteristic. So at a minimum, you need those. Nobody else claims that. We're the only two games in town that really claim that with any sort of serious claim. Now, they claim, and this is a serious historical claim, that the institution of the papacy and these keys have been held continually by people all the way through history to Pope Leo today. All the way through. We say, no, that didn't happen. There was a break. There was a loss of institutional authority, and that because of that, there was schism and doctrinal drift. Okay? That is it. That's the whole great apostasy narrative. And so the reason I went after the papacy is because it's the only institution that claims a continual existence that goes all the way back to the apostles, that holds the same sort of centralized authority that Peter held. No one else does it. I don't need to argue against them. Like they don't have it. They just don't even fit in our claims. The great apostasy is a claim ultimately about the Catholic Church. It's the rebuttal of their claim because no one else even claims it. Right. So that is essentially what I mean by the great apostasy. And let me go real quick on the burden of proof thing, because he brought that up. My burden, we each have a burden of proof in a debate, because my burden was to show that there was a loss of central authority and that there was doctrinal schism and drift. His burden would be to say there wasn't a great apostasy. And how do you do that? Will you show that there was no loss of central authority or doctrinal drift, which is the Catholic claim?
No, I didn't think it was dishonest, your approach. If anything, I was surprised by those who thought it was. Now, I want to bring up the Protestants in a second, but it's an essential characteristic in our understanding of Christ's Church, and both for Catholics, was that central adjudicating authority. And you're saying, historically speaking, if we can show there wasn't a continuous line from Peter to the Bishop of Rome, that would undermine the claims of Catholicism, and therefore that would support that there was an institutional apostasy and loss of that central authority. Yep,
and that's why I went the route that I did. So I knew what my job was. My job was to show that the papacy doesn't go all the way back, and so I focused the debate on that. Mm-hmm. And it was funny because I'm arguing against a Catholic. Like I was expecting him to be. I mean, the guy has a channel called Shameless Popery.
Yeah. So when he was acting like, oh, I was taken back when you were bringing up all things about papacy, because that's not what we were debating. Did you expect that he would have been anticipating it more and more prepared for it? Seeing as he's a great Catholic scholar and theologian.
I was shocked, honestly, I was shocked at how quickly he abandoned the papacy. because he didn't even try and defend the papacy in the debate.
Yeah, I noticed that as well.
It was very, very weak, the defense that he gave of it. I mean, he gave some of the talking points, which are, again, you heard them, like, they're not good. And so, but he kept being like, well, the Orthodox could be true. And it was like, I kind of was like, Joe, I don't believe the Orthodox is true for the very reasons that you Catholics say they're not true. You guys are the ones saying you don't have a central authority. You don't have a Petrine office. You don't have somebody who's like a Peter. And that's your argument. And I'm like, that's a great argument. You're right. The problem is the Catholics actually get it right. They figured it out. They said, yeah, in the original church, there was a central adjudicating authority. And they're just like, so it must be us.
We're the only guys.
Nope. Because the alternative, what's the alternative? The alternative is that there was an apostasy, and that couldn't be the case.
Right.
And so I'm like, or it could.
So one thing he brought up, because quite core to your arguments and our claims, was that the central authority was lost with the death of the apostles, and that there need to be a restoration to restore again a prophet and priesthood keys, and we have living apostles today. And I can't remember if he brought this up in the debate, or it might have been your live stream conversation, but he said, you know, while the apostles were being killed during the 1st to 2nd centuries, that new apostles weren't being called. And perhaps the apostles were like the foundation that Christ laid, but that it wasn't intended that his church would continue to have apostles, and that the church could essentially govern itself while still recognizing there had to be that central authority that the Bishop of Rome had. But what would be your response to him saying that it doesn't necessitate that there needs to be this continuation of apostles after the death of them?
Yeah, that is, I would say that that's the strongest case against the great apostasy. It's sort of an incredulity. It's like, well, they didn't call new apostles, so it must have been intentional, right?
Right.
And I think to a degree it might have been intentional. But I would put it this way. So the idea is that you still need to have a central adjudicating authority in the church. Now they're saying it's to preserve the doctrines. Now I actually hold to the idea that, okay, let's say this is the deposit of faith narrative. Let's say they actually did have a deposit of faith and it was complete, had everything. And then there was this group that was put together, this is sort of the Catholic claim, to guard the deposit of faith and make sure that it wasn't corrupt.
Right.
Okay.
Preservation.
They preserve the faith all the way through, no corruption, and they do that. Well, I can just say that hasn't happened. Like, it obviously has not happened.
Yeah.
Like, there was nothing, like, where in the deposit of faith was there a pope? Where in the deposit of faith, or did it say that the Pope was the Bishop of Rome? Where in the deposit of faith does it say that the Pope is infallible? Where in the deposit of faith does it say that Mary was assumed into heaven bodily? Where did it say in the deposit of faith that if I knowingly reject the bodily assumption of Mary, that I've committed a mortal sin and will go to hell? Like, it doesn't say those things.
Yeah, nowhere in the New Testament.
Nowhere.
Later traditions.
Well, the thing is, and they say, well, tradition, and it's like, well, where in the tradition? And it's not in the tradition. It's nowhere. Like, these doctrines came out of nowhere, and I know why they came out of nowhere. They came out of nowhere because when Augustine went and created the doctrine of original sin as a theory, all of a sudden it created all sorts of problems once that doctrine is adopted as a dogma of the faith. Once it's adopted as a dogma, you have to go, oh, crap, well, what about Mary? Well, she had to be sinless too. And so then you come up with the Immaculate Conception and all of this crap that you can look at it and you just be like, look, they're just making crap up. And then they keep saying, well, it's tradition. It's like, this isn't tradition. You guys are not guarding the faith. Like, yeah, it's possible. It isn't impossible that you could have Christ deliver the gospel and then give no more new public revelation. That's not an impossibility. But the reality is that it is clear that it was corrupt. And not only that, because of the nature of mankind, like, corruption is the problem. And so you need a sort of, like, if God is not continuing to speak and to guide his people through revelation, which is, by the way, what he's done always throughout scripture, like, that's the pattern, like, then you have an issue. So in my mind, it's the problem is that theory, while it isn't necessarily like, oh, that isn't possible. It's just that it isn't what the actual evidence shows in any way, shape, or form. And if you could, like, here's the thing, I'd become a Catholic. If they could show me that the doctrines of the Catholic Church were reliable, consistent, reasonable, like basically if the Catholic Church was teaching essentially what Latter-day Saints teach today, I'd
No
be a
doctrinal
Catholic.
corruption, and demonstrate that the first Bishop of Rome did receive, those priesthood keys from Peter.
Yeah, and that they could show that they're actually, like, imagine if our church just didn't receive any more new, like, canonized revelation. All right, cool. Like, it wouldn't mean that my church is false.
Yeah.
Right? And so it's not an impossibility, but the problem is when I actually look at the fruits of it, when I look at the doctrines themselves, when I look at the way they contradict scripture, like the Protestants, that's what Protestants did a great job of. See, the Protestants recognize that this whole thing is off the friggin' rails, and they use the Bible to do it. And the Bible is, like, you want to talk about tradition, like that's the tradition. That's the heart of the tradition. That's the apostolic tradition in writing. And when you're contradicting that, like, sorry, then you claim, you kill yourself when you say that we're infallible. Like, I'm the when I say that this is something, like when they make infallible decrees, and I want to make sure people know, not everything the Pope says is infallible. They don't claim that, but there are certain what are called dogmas of you have to remember, in Catholicism, there's something called a dogma.
Mm-hmm.
A dogma is something that is proclaimed by the Catholic Church infallibly. Like, it cannot be false.
Right.
If it were false, the Catholic Church is false because then their infallible source is actually fallible and the whole thing falls apart. So if you believe in that the Pope is indeed can make infallible statements, then, and I use examples like the Assumption of Mary because it is just so ridiculously not anywhere in the tradition.
Yeah.
And so, but they believe that it was always part of the dogmas of Christians. And so, anyway.
And they claim this is an infallible dogma, so it can't be wrong according to their claims.
Yes, and not only that, here's the really wild thing. In Catholic dogma, if you knowingly reject an infallible decree of the Pope, then you've committed a mortal sin. Now, what's a mortal sin? A mortal sin is a sin that if you don't repent of it, you go to hell.
Oh, wow.
So in Catholic dogma, the infallible teaching of the Catholic Church is if you knowingly reject the bodily Assumption of Mary, you are going to hell. And I knowingly reject that doctrine.
Well, let's just hope they're not right then.
Exactly. And so, and I go, and I made this point in the debate. I said, you guys, if you'd go to hell for not believing this, you'd think Jesus or his disciples or somebody in the first 1,000 years of Christianity
might have said something about it.
Might have said something about this.
That's
just so it ends up just getting ridiculous when you look into it. And the simple, very simple explanation is that, oh, maybe there was a loss of central authority. Now, one last thing to address this, because I have to confront it head on. Why did it happen? Okay. Well, anytime you ask, why did God allow X, you're asking a question that is always going to be a hard question. Okay. Why didn't God just give the fullness of the gospel in the time of Moses? Why did Jesus have to die on the cross? Why, down to even personal things. Okay. I am a believer, especially as an open theist, that God is in a dynamic relationship with humanity. We are agents. We're in like a dance, and we are a crappy dance partner. And I was thinking about this for the debate, trying to figure out how I'd respond to it. And I came up with something that I think is actually, I think it makes a lot of sense to me. When Jesus was crucified, what did they put over his head? Do you remember?
The crown of thorns.
Crown of thorns, but above that, on the cross, there was a sign. What did the sign say?
Oh, like, here lies King of the Jews or something like that?
King of the Jews, right? The Romans killed Jesus because he was, well, the Jews convinced them to. But the argument was this guy is he's become the centralized leader of a large group of people. Okay. In the ancient world, if you had a growing movement and you were the leader of that movement, what would happen to you? You'd get killed.
Yeah.
Right. By the way, if you want to know how that works out, even study the history of our church. When you are the leader of a group that is seen as centralized and growing, and believe me, power structures don't like that, especially in the ancient world.
Yeah.
Okay? So if the Lord wanted to call more apostles to lead this movement of Christians in the ancient world, what would have happened to them?
Well, the pattern was the previous ones were all killed, so it's very likely the new ones might have been killed as well.
You're right. They just would have been killed. It would have been useless. Okay. So you have that. You have a world that just won't accept it. Not only that, it might even raise the ire of the powers that be against all Christians, right? So what happened was Christianity becomes this sort of like underground movement. And one of the things that you find about underground movements is they can actually be very hard to eradicate. And so you have this underground Christianity that's going on for a long time, and so God is working with people as best he can in the context that they're in. He's keeping and in Revelation, it talks about the woman. By the way, a woman is a metaphor for the bride of Christ, who with her child has to flee into the wilderness to avoid the dragon. And so I think that's a very fitting metaphor for what kind of had to happen. Christianity essentially had to go underground because the institutional structures of the day wouldn't allow it. Then, even worse, a lot of the institutions of the day, they actually end up bringing in and marrying this Christian movement and using it to their own ends. And if you don't think that happened, you need to go study history and the relationship between the Roman Church when it was adopted by the Roman Empire and how it was utilized by that empire and by the powers for the next 1,500 years at least. So God did his best. He worked with humanity as best he could, but he couldn't establish the fullness of the institution of the church because the institutions of the day just weren't going to allow it. However, he continued to work with the body of believers, the church in like the non-institutional sense. And over time, the gospel and teachings of Christ continued to spread until in the 1500s, some of them started realizing, wait a minute, we're off the rails here, guys. Like, this institution's been co-opted by government. We have corruption all over. Our doctrines are all crap. And they go back to the Bible of all places and are like, this is like what we need. We need to do what the Bible says. And they start to promote religious liberty. And all of a sudden, there's this place where the government, the force of violence, is sort of like, we can't use that against religion. We need to be able to tolerate religious movements and institutions to rise up without the government feeling threatened and taking it out. Jonah Barnes, by the way, told me, he's like, when we were talking about the debate, he was like, you know, people are like, oh, God just waited 1,800 years to restore his church. And he goes, yeah, it's not like anything really fascinating happened in like 1776 in the world of religious liberty. It's not like that was just, oh, that just happened to happen just before it. Because that is what happened.
Yeah.
Essentially, you didn't have religious liberty before then. And when you don't have religious liberty, heck, you live in Ireland, dude. You know.
Oh, yes, I know.
You know all about how that goes when you don't have that. And so it would make sense that, and the way I look at it is like the church never went anywhere. Okay. The body of believers was always there. But the problem is that as unruly, stupid children, we wouldn't allow for the fullness of the institution to exist because we'd kill it. And then all of a sudden, enough of we finally became Christian enough largely through the Reformation, that we got rid of the ancient evil system of marrying the state to religion and killing everyone who disagrees with you. And then we had a place to do it. And even in that context, we barely made it, man. Like, look at Missouri. Like, they tried to kill us.
And our leader was martyred as well. No, I think that's actually a good point to partially explain why it took so long. Because as you said, if a prophet had been raised up, he could have been put to death and the movement could have been stopped. And the United States was that land of liberty and religious freedom. So I want to bring up what the Protestants might say, because obviously they broke away from the Catholic Church. You had the Protestant Reformation and the protests of Martin Luther and others. So they would agree of some institutional corruption and doctrinal drift and things like that. But they claim that there was no ultimate apostasy or falling away from Christ's church. And again, they would probably say that we don't actually need the institutional church. They would say, like, the foundation was laid with the apostles, but they would define the church as being the disciples, the body of believers. We have the gospel, we have the New Testament. We don't need an institutional church. And, we have our Protestant friends we love, Steve Heinecker and Jeff McCullen. I have family members who are devout Protestants, and I really admire Protestants in many ways. But why not just go the Protestant route of saying the institutional hierarchy and church doesn't matter. The church is just the body of believers, and therefore that never left. So there wasn't really a widespread apostasy.
Yeah, and in a certain sense, I'd agree with them and say, you're right. If there is no institutional church, then there never was an apostasy. The apostasy is taught by us is entirely about the institution. It's not about the body of believers. But it's a very different argument that they're making. They're making a positive claim. They're saying you don't need an institutional church. Mm-hmm. And the problem is,
and they're also arguing either an institutional church was not set up, or if it was, it wasn't intended to remain and continue.
Yeah, the Bible, first of all, is just crystal clear that there was an institutional church set up. That institutional church was founded on apostles and prophets.
That's hard to argue against.
Teaching offices, like, I'm sorry, you guys, like it just did. No one after the apostles died were like, oh, there is like Protestantism did not exist until 1,500 years after the original church. Everyone understood across the board, every church father, that there's an institution. Like, it's to just make that up as though there isn't a need for one. It, to me, is just like, are you kidding me? Like that? No. And then, and there's a reason for that. There's a perfectly logical reason why you need an institution. It's to actually organize the kingdom into a kingdom, and to adjudicate, because then you get the Protestant problem. The Protestant problem is, okay, if we're all equals, it's the ultimate democratization of the kingdom of God. So you don't have a kingdom, you have a democracy. And essentially everyone just is, and it's all Bible study groups. And these Bible study groups, like, they just segment themselves based on the way that they view the Bible. Right. And believe me, there's a lot of ways people see the Bible. And that's why you have everything from lesbian priests, marrying transgender people to each other, to like the Protestants who won't let their kids watch Harry Potter and that tell women they have to shut up when they're at church.
A very broad spectrum, and people disagreeing each other in these different interpretations, and because they're all sort of on the same level of authority, the priesthood of all believers. If you disagree with, say, your local pastor, you could go on to create your own church, and that's why there's so many different Protestant denominations. And
your whole salvation is based on are you interpreting the Bible right? Like, because ultimately, if you're not interpreting the Bible right, you're not worshiping the right Jesus, and they have no idea even what a Christian is. They have no way to tell if someone is a Christian or not, right? Like, the lines, like the amount of problems that sort of mentality creates is just crazy. And to say that the scripture is the ultimate authority and not a living person is nuts. Imagine this. Imagine we tried to have a country and we said, well, the Constitution is the ultimate authority of the land. And we could be like, oh, yeah, that's true. And the Constitution is self-interpreting. Can you imagine? Like, you think that's going to work? You think that's actually going to create a nation that holds together in any coherent way? Like, no, you don't have a church. And if you say that the body of, and here's the other thing, there's a side to which I can empathize with this point of view, where you say, look, there is no institutional church. It's basically, do you have a genuine relationship with the Jesus of the Bible? That's all that matters. And this is sort of what progressive Protestantism kind of looks like. They say, look, if you have a genuine relationship with Jesus, whether you're Mormon, like, theology doesn't matter. Just like, do you love Jesus? And that's kind of it. Then you go to heaven. You're good. Just read the Bible, try your best to follow what Jesus taught. And to me, it's like, man, that's like Jesus just, again, and the whole reliance on the Bible. When it's like, why do we rely on the Bible? Well, because it was given by revelation. Well, that means revelation is the thing that really matters, and God just shut up. Like, again, you can, the amount of problems in Protestantism are just so enormous. And all of this gets solved when you just say, look, what was going on in the Bible is just, it didn't stop. It's still going on. And we're like the only ones out there that are saying that. Like, God has prophets. He's still calling them, and he's still guiding the world. They're not infallible, but they're reliable. And we have an institution, and it's not led by infallible people, but it's led by reliable people. And we're building the kingdom, trying to be better. And we have these doctrines that are beautiful and consistent with the Bible. And like, this is why I'm a Latter-day Saint.
So I remember I did a video a few months ago on what does it mean to be the only true and living church, because on the one hand, the church can be defined as the institution, and foundational to the Restoration's claims is that there was an apostasy. Joe Smith had his first vision. He was told not to join any of the other churches. He was visited by apostolic figures giving priesthood authority and priesthood keys. So on the one hand, like, it's very important to us, the institution of the church. And there's been some, progressive members or believers in the church who sort of like, all churches are true and it doesn't really matter, the one true church. Whereas, like, no, it's very central to our claims. But then on the other hand, I also agree with that there are people who are outside the church who are sincere believers, as you would, and have a relationship with God and Jesus Christ and are having spiritual experiences. And I remember I was sort of like pondering about this and trying to sort of make sense of it in my own mind. And I read section 1 of the Doctrine and Covenants, and I read it like in a way that I'd never noticed it in that way before, where it talks about, us being the only true and living church. But then the Lord said, speaking unto the church collectively and not individually. And the way I interpret it, and there was a really good BYU Studies article by, I think it was Robert Millett, who he expands on this really well, that as an institution or an organization, we believe that we are the Lord's restored church with, that priesthood authority and leadership and more of a full understanding of doctrine. But individually, that we're not only people that are the Lord's church.
Yeah.
Or not only Latter-day Saints are his people or his followers.
Correct.
And in the Book of Mormon, it talks about there's two churches, the Church of the Lamb, the Church of the Devil. I cannot believe that that means that only members of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints are the Church of the Lamb. Everyone else is the Church of the Devil. Or some people who have interpreted it as the Catholic Church. That just doesn't work, because you're not either a member of our church or a member of the Catholic Church. And there's even scriptures, and I think you mentioned some of these with Joe, where the Lord talks about, like, I bring forth sort of the restoration in the Book of Mormon, not to destroy my church, but to build it up. So in some ways, I think the Lord does consider people outside of our church individually as like his people, and part 100%. Of his church is a body of believers. But there is that distinction where we do also believe the institutional authority is important, and that we have that sort of unique restoration.
Correct. Institutionally, we are the one true church because we hold the keys of the kingdom, and that authority has been given to direct the work of building the kingdom of God on earth. However, who's part of the kingdom of God, who is anyone who is doing their best to follow Jesus Christ, seeking light, goodness, and truth, like you're part of the church. And the only question is in the little c sense, right? Now we'd
Yeah.
love for you. In fact, that's what we're doing, gathering Israel. We're going to everyone and saying, hey, this institution has been restored. If you love light and goodness and knowledge and truth, come join with us and build the kingdom with us in an organized fashion, instead of just as individuals trying their best, kind of groping in the dark. The whole idea is that we're organizing Zion into a society of people who are literally like giving assignments to each other to like look after one another, and to, like I just got called to run our young men's camp we're doing, and like to develop relationships and to foster people and to look after the temporal and spiritual welfare of others. It's a beautiful vision, right? And it isn't exclusivist in that sense. It's saying, look, you people that are outside, that are part of the church, right? The people who want to follow Jesus and that are trying to, whatever level of understanding they have, and I would say that those people will be saved ultimately, right? People will get what they want, but we're trying on earth as members of the church to establish the kingdom on earth today. And so like in reality, and that's a super cool thing. It's totally consistent with scripture. It's, it isn't this weird Protestant sort of like, you have to believe in the right Jesus or you go to hell. It's more like, it's if you love God, come and make a covenant with him, because he's doing a great work, and come and be a part of it, which I'm just like, yeah, but only one institution holds those keys. And in that sense, we're the true church, but people on the outside, they're part of the body of believers, I would say.
Yeah, and it can seem to some people that very exclusivist, if that's even a word, that almost that we see ourselves as like superior, like we're the exclusive one true church. But I also like that we have more of this inclusive view that people of other religions, people in Christianity, can also be considered part of his church individually, the body of believers. And also, we've talked about this before, our view of the afterlife and the gospel being preached in the spirit world, and everyone having the opportunity to receive the fullness of the gospel, whether in this life or the next. Whereas, Orthodox Christianity sees us as heretical, and because we don't believe in the creeds, because they say we believe in a different Jesus and a different gospel, well, we're just going to hell, which is worse in many ways.
Oh yeah, and I would say too, as not everyone who's in the institution is a member of the church in the sense of a body of believers. So if we're talking about the body of believers, like there's a lot of people that are in the church that aren't sincerely seeking Jesus Christ and that are wicked and terrible. So, but the institution that exists the whole point of the institution is to try and gather together and organize the body of believers, the sincere believers, and to basically mobilize them to do stuff and to build things as a collective group. That's why we come together and make covenants and go to church and have callings and create universities and do all these other things. Like, what are we trying to do? We're trying to build the kingdom. And we're trying to invite everyone we can to join in that process. But just because you have gotten baptized into this institution, like, so what? Like, are you actually living it? Like, and I know people outside the institution that are far more committed to Jesus Christ and his gospel than people that are in the institution. But that doesn't mean that we don't need the institution.
Yeah.
It just means we need people in the institution to quit being idiots and to recognize what they have.
Yeah, and I think it's also like often we say this in the church that like, oh, there's still light, truth, and goodness, in outside of the church and in other faiths and Christian churches. I think the first time I sort of recognized that was like as a missionary, although I still believe that like, oh, there's still a portion of truth in other churches and religions. I think I did very much see it as like, we do kind of have like this monopoly on like, well, at least we believe we have the fullness of the gospel, but sort of on like real spiritual experiences. And I remember we were teaching this Protestant guy, and we were just going back and forth over different Bible interpretations of different passages we were trying to use to support an apostasy and restoration, or support some of our unique LDS doctrines. And we were just bashing, going back and forth. And finally, I just said to him, like, why are you a Christian? Like, why do you believe in the Bible? And then he shared like a really heartfelt like testimony and experiences about him, how he gained a relationship with God and with Jesus Christ, and felt like he had a born again experience. And that was the first time where I experienced being like, I think like that was a real experience you had. Like, I think that was genuine, sincere, and like, I don't want to like take anything away from that. Like, you hold on to that, just see if this is more of God's
100%.
truth, and if this will strengthen your relationship. And sometimes when we hear about people having spiritual experiences in other religions, sometimes we can feel like that can undermine ours a little bit. But really, it makes sense to me if someone in another faith or religion is seeking God or seeking Christ, that they would have some sort of a spiritual experience, like a Christian who sincerely wants to give their life to Jesus Christ and repent of their sins. It makes sense to me that God would give them that spiritual experience.
And the question is what are people willing to receive? I think God will give you whatever you're willing to receive. So here's the way I look at Protestants and Catholics and Orthodox. I think they bring people up.
Yeah.
And I think that, like, if I'm God and I have a Catholic missionary and he's talking to someone who's an atheist, am I going to help that Catholic missionary to move someone towards Catholicism? Yes. Like, I would do that. Like, I would want that to happen because the person is moving closer to me. You know what I mean? And so you have to remember, we used to baptize people, by the way, right near you in the British Isles. We used to baptize people by the boatloads.
Oh, yeah.
But now it's really difficult amongst the native British populations to get anyone to be baptized. And the reason for that is because now the Protestant and Catholic movements have messed things up so badly there that now people have become secular.
Yeah.
Right?
It's now very secular.
And that's the thing. If people weren't secular, like, what was the difference in the 1800s in the British Isles versus today? Why do we have so much success before, but now we didn't? The reason why is because back then people were actually religious. They were actually Christian. It's much easier to get a Christian to embrace the fullness of the gospel than it is to get an atheist to embrace the fullness of the gospel. Usually, in fact, I think the Protestants of all people, I think, do a great job of getting people out of atheism.
Yeah. No, and I think they're a really important part of this latter-day work. And even in the year since I've been back to the church, I sometimes will listen to like pastors giving sermons and ministers and other media, and I feel like I've received inspiration or answers to prayer, or strengthened my relationship with God, or they've given insights and perspectives which haven't taken away but just added to what I already have. So I think there's so much that we can appreciate. And I think it's good to have the discussions where we talk about the differences and distinctions. And I think you do a good job in your debates. There's so much that we can learn from these other religious faith traditions as well.
Yeah. And the way I look at it is, I look at it very much like this. It all just depends on where people moving towards. If you're moving someone closer to Christ, then do it. And I even believe that some of the miraculous experiences that are out there, like, here's one that the Catholics will bring up. They'll say, well, Marian apparitions, right? Like, if those got to be either, if they're true, then Catholicism's true. But my thing is, I don't know that that necessarily follows, because I could see that if a person will accept Catholicism, and that's the best we can do, well, frick, send the Virgin Mary to help them be more Catholic, man. Like, at least move them closer, move the ball forward. And now, so why do I go and debate with these people or do any of that kind of stuff? It's because I also don't think people should ever be complacent. I also think that if you're sitting in the Catholic Church thinking we've arrived, that to me is a problem. And so I would go to Catholics and say, hey, love Catholicism, love all the things we agree on. We can talk about all that. But also, like, there's bigger truths even than what you guys have. You got to keep all that you have that's true, but What if we can actually add to that and build and break down some of the things you have that aren't defensible? Because one of the biggest problems out there, one of the reasons that, and I think this is one of the reasons that the British Isles have secularized, is because when you have a really crappy theology that isn't defensible, and your God is like sending people to hell because they believe in the wrong Jesus, you know what that drives a lot of people to? It drives them to atheism. They go, this is nuts. Like this, you get Christopher Hitchens basically arguing against the God of Calvinism. And I'm like, right on.
Yeah.
You're exactly right. That God is a monster.
And that's whenever I was away from the church and I was Christian and going to Christian churches, that the problem with their theology was something that was pushing me away from Christianity. No, I was probably heading more towards agnosticism, atheism, right before I had experiences that brought me back to the church. And I think that's the strength of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints is our theology. But I have a family member who she's left the church a few years ago and doesn't believe anymore. And she was sort of in this limbo between, I don't think she really was sure what she believed. But recently she started going to this Protestant church. And, at first, there's part of you where it's like, I just want to debate her like what Jacob does with people. And we've had a couple of discussions where, when she's brought up her issues with the church, she's asked for my perspective on like Protestantism. And I brought up both, claims of like authority, but also talking about the theology and why I find ours more appealing. But like she's shared like really positive experiences she's been having with this church, with this pastor, with her faith in Jesus Christ. And the scripture that came to my mind was one that we have in the Book of Mormon, in Moroni 7, that which is of God, if it invites and entices you to love God, to serve him, to believe in Christ, to do good, it's inspired of God. So I was able to look at that and not feel threatened, but feel like, yeah, maybe God is guiding you and inspiring you, and this is bringing you closer to him. Obviously, ideally, I love for you to come back and have experiences to bring you back. But I don't believe that, you've been deceived. I think you're probably drawing closer to God by going to this church. And I think that's something which I love about our theology, is we can see the good and the truth in other religions, and God may be inspiring people in other faiths. If it's drawing them closer to him to believe in Christ and do good, then that's inspired of God.
Yep. And I'm all about it. I'm like, get people to take what they'll receive.
Yeah.
Move the ball forward. Now I'll go ahead and still disagree with them about different things, because I think that they have moved forward, but it's like, are you stopping? Because I think that there could be more, and maybe they're not ready for it. We have to remember that the Lord gave the law of Moses before he gave the gospel of Jesus Christ. Why? Because the people weren't ready for it. I believe that the reason the fullness of the institution wasn't able to be continually established after Jesus Christ was because the world wasn't ready for it. They just weren't. And so we should be patient with people, and we should be less concerned about where they are in the end, but what direction they're moving in. Right. And so, when you begin to look at this as this, we're all in this together, and like various people are moving the ball forward, it's a much more fulfilling sort of view of the world than this idea of like, well, we're in this club and everyone who's outside of it is bad and going to hell or whatever.
Yeah.
And
it creates an even bigger us versus them mentality.
Yeah. And it creates this idea that the problem isn't each other. The problem is sin. The problem are the things that draw us away from God. And so, that's what Jesus taught. But he also, and this is, I think, is the important part that goes back to the unique thing about the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, is that he wanted to organize his followers under prophetic guidance to do that work. It wasn't just willy-nilly, like, hey, everyone just kind of like be good and try and do good according to your own things. It's like, no, I'm going to call prophets who are going to organize you into Israel, into my people who are doing my work. Yeah. And go to the world and gather out all those who love light, goodness, truth, and bid Babylon farewell and gather to the mountains of Ephraim to dwell, right? kind of. That's sort of the vision. And it's honestly, it's beautiful. It's, I think one of the things, just going to kind of Joseph Smith and the church, as I've learned more about what the vision was of Joseph Smith, like what was he trying to do and how it incorporates into this theological system and the way it relates to the New Testament Jesus and what Jesus was doing, I am just blown away. I'm just blown away at how beautiful it is, how coherent it is, how, like, if the guy was a liar or if he wasn't what he claimed to be, he was still the biggest religious genius of all time. And he came up with something just unbelievably awesome. And that's, I don't know, I look at that and a huge part of my testimony is based in, when I look at all of the picture, I just find this thing that's beautiful. And not only, I don't mean just subjectively beautiful, like more beautiful than any of the other options I've been delivered.
Yeah.
Right. And so, shoot, this is a crazy story with Joseph Smith with golden tablets and seer stones, but I'm willing to roll the dice on it. Cause like, I haven't found anything better. And frankly, like, I'd almost expect for something miraculous to happen. Like, how is it that he solves this problem of the central authority and the apostasy? How is it that he writes the Book of Mormon with all its complexity? How is it that he comes up with this really beautiful soteriology that isn't binary? How is it that he comes up with this vision of the kingdom of God that exists in such a way that it is inclusive while still maintaining sort of something unique and a one people that the Bible clearly talks about? Like, it's, and you know, better solutions to the problem of evil. Like, what? Old Joe Smith came up with all this? I just can't help but come away from it and just say, I see something inspired in this. I don't think Joseph is behind it. And so I believe.
I resonate with so much of that. Well, one question I wanted to bring up, I want to come back to finishing on a really nice note, but whenever I listened to your episode with Steve and Colby, one of the arguments they made against you was that you had a little bit of a double standard. So I'd like you to sort of address that you were very good at pointing out the problems with the Catholic claims and referencing how there was schism in early Christianity, doctrinal corruption, pointing out the problems with papal infallibility, but then you don't apply the same scrutiny to Mormonism or LDS prophets. Like, we've had schism, there's been doctrinal changes or false doctrine taught, things later disavowed. So how would you quickly address, are you sort of you're being very critical towards Catholicism, but then giving Mormonism a pass? Or what's the distinction?
No, I wouldn't say that I'm giving a double standard. First of all, let's just address the schism point. Okay. Do you see a difference between schism and apostasy?
Yes.
What would you say is the difference between schism and apostasy?
So I would see schism as you could have break-off groups from the institutional church, but that doesn't mean the church itself has fallen into apostasy. But you could have people being like, well, I disagree with the institutional church, and I'm just going to break off and start my own group. Whereas apostasy would be, as an institution, it has been led astray or the loss of that authority. At least that's how my mind would, distinguish it.
So I look at it and I put it similar, maybe a little different. If I have two equal authorities and they break apart from each other, that's what I consider schism. Okay. If I have the true institution and someone steps away, apostasy means standing apart, like standing away from something. Okay. You have to have something to stand away from. Okay. So if I have a group like today, if Jacob Hansen went out and I said, I'm starting my own church, that wouldn't be a schism. The reason why is I'd be an apostate. The reason why is
you'd be an apostate from the church. Yeah,
exactly. I'd be stepping away from the institution that actually holds the authority, right? But if you and I are Protestants and we decide that we have a disagreement and we break apart from each other, have we committed apostasy? No, we just are splitting because we're equals in authority. Okay. So has the church ever had Schism? No, it's only had apostasy. It's had people break away from the authoritative institution, okay, which holds the keys of the kingdom. Now, why not follow Sidney Rigdon or Strang or any of the others, right? The only way I would follow them is if they could make a legitimate claim to holding the apostolic keys. But the pattern in the Bible is that the apostles held the keys, and the chief amongst the apostles held the fullness of the keys. That's the biblical pattern. So when Joseph Smith dies, who was left that was an apostle? Well, the 12. Who is the head of the apostles? Brigham Young. It's the biblical pattern that continues. Now, so I don't view those groups that broke off. And a person could disagree. They could say that, well, those other guys had it and you're the apostate. The question isn't, is there schism? The question is who's in apostasy and who isn't. Okay. So I look at those groups as having apostasy. Now, as far as changes in the teachings of the church or doctrinal errors, first of all, change always happens in the church in terms of its application of doctrines. Doctrines are truth claims, okay? And meaning official church, like the claims that are officially made by the brethren, right? As kind of the official position of the church. We actually have had very few of our doctrinal changes that have changed. Blacks in the priesthood, I would say that's an application of a policy, or I'm sorry, an application of a doctrine. But the doctrines that underlie the priesthood ban, those have been disavowed by the church, and those were doctrine. They were taught officially from the church. So those are truth claims that the church now rejects that they once held. But what else? What's a significant truth claim held officially by the church as an institution that no longer is held, that we now reject?
So some people would point to Adam and God, but then that was really more Brigham Young.
And it was disputed by other apostles at the time.
Yeah. And then with polygamy, the church still holds the view that it's doctrinal, even though we don't. Our
doctrine didn't change. Exactly, our practice changed. That's true, but our doctrine on polygamy hasn't changed. We still fully believe that polygamy can be authorized by God legitimately, and we believe it was authorized by God legitimately, commanded by God legitimately to the prophet Joseph Smith.
Yeah.
So tell me, like everyone wants to talk about all these. The doctrine's always changing. Well, tell me, like what? And what they get into is like, well, this church leader once said that. Congratulations. This was once taught in a general conference address. Congratulations. You have to establish that it was officially held by all 12 members of the Quorum of the 12 and the president of the church, and understood by all to be the truth that we all embrace in the church.
And even I've been doing some research and reading on the history of evolution. And even in the early 20th century, the church did not have an official doctrine for or against evolution. In fact, in sort of the first presidency statements and other statements, it was very much a neutral position. And then really it was after the death of many apostles like Widstow and Talmage and Roberts that then, we had Joseph Fielding Smith put out his publications. And even President McKay, from reading and listening to Ben Spackman, privately embraced evolution, but then very much the new sort of correlated curriculum and then things with Mormon doctrine and manuals, that became almost like what people perceived as like the doctrine, but it was never actually officially, by the first presidency in the Quorum of the 12, the church's view. So even though people would say that's a doctrinal change, if you look at, if you would define official doctrine, which is almost difficult to determine what exactly is official doctrine, but coming from the first presidency and the Quorum of the 12, not even the church's position on evolution has there been a big doctrinal change. And if anything, the church's position now is more in line with where they were in the early 20th century, which is quite interesting because growing up, I would have been very much a Bruce R. McConkie sort of fundamentalist. This is Mormon doctrine, but it's interesting to learn about the history on that.
Correct. And I would say that the church actually doesn't have that many things that it holds as official doctrine. Now, what is the official doctrine of the church? I'll tell you what it is. It's whatever President Oakes and the rest of the Quorum of the 12 as the highest leaders of the church say it is. That's the doctrine at the time that we have it, right? And so there's very few things that they all unitedly claim together as sort of like, if I were to go into the room with them and ask all of them about it, would they all be in agreement with no, and not only that, be in agreement on it and then be willing to teach that publicly? Like, I think that's a fairly good judge for what that is. And even things like Adam God, if I went in and was in 1855 and I walked to each of the Quorum of the 12's offices and asked them what they thought about that doctrine, Orson Pratt would have just been like, nope.
Yeah.
I think that's crap. But he wouldn't necessarily say it publicly. There were disagreements. But it frustrates the anti-Mormons because they want to say that every little thing that is ever said is a doctrine of the church. But there's this sort of level of like our doctrines, and then there's a level of like, and there's a ton of this, of like what we think about our doctrines or additional ideas that we have, or the theories of a particular apostle about how this all works. And it doesn't mean those don't matter. You know what I mean? It's not like we just ignore them, but we have to recognize that they're not binding on us. The scriptures are another place that you can find, like, if it's in scripture, that's considered something that's canon. That's considered official by the church. But even the canon we don't believe is infallible. We believe it is reliable. And the same thing with our doctrines. So what I see in the church is I see that we have a very reliable, not infallible set of doctrine that is taught in our scriptures and in the church generally from its inception. It's a myth to say that the doctrine is always changing. Practices are always changing. The application of doctrine are always changing. People's ideas about doctrine are changing. But the core doctrines of the church are, and they're not like crazy things. There are things that we share with other Christians, like Jesus was the Son of God. He arose from death on the third day. He continues to live with a glorified body. Like, those things are things we hold. So it's a myth to say that our doctrines are always changing. The problem is our doctrines just aren't as exciting as a lot of people want to think that they are.
Well, we need to do a separate episode at some point in the future about prophetic fallibility and reliability, and explore your collective witness model and ask more questions on that. One question I'm actually really curious on: if you were to leave the LDS Church, so say hypothetically, we find the gold plates and okay, they're a 19th century hoax, and or you say the church made the doctrinal change of gay marriage, say something like that, and you just felt like I can't be part of this institution anymore. I'm curious, where would you go? Because you've told me before that you're first a believer in God, then Christianity, then the Restoration. Do you have any ideas where you might gravitate towards, or would you just start your own church?
I would probably be, as funny as it may seem, well, I don't want to say progressive because that word's loaded. I would be a mere Christian.
Right. Sort of non-denominational sort of.
I'd be non-denominational. I would hold to the idea of an apostasy. I would say the original institution isn't around. And I would say maybe one day God will restore that institution before the second coming or something like that. I would say that Mormonism is true in the sense of spiritually, that it teaches deep truths about God. I would reject the heavenly binary. I think you can do that even on the grounds of the Bible. And so I would hold to a Christian. I mean, I would reject the Trinity. Like, I would still largely be a Latter-day Saint because I think that the things Latter-day Saint are true because they're true independent of Joseph Smith's claims about them. If Joseph Smith says that the Trinity is false and he gives a bunch of reasons, even if he was a liar about everything else, he was right about that, right? Like, there's so many things he was right about. So I would end up in this place where I would be a mere Christian.
But not a creedal Christian.
No, not a creedal Christian. I'd be a mere Christian, not a creedal Christian, that would be still hold to a ton of things Latter-day Saints teach about the Bible, because what we teach about the Bible is true. So I'd be in kind of a weird spot that way, but I would have to reject.
You wouldn't hold a sola scripture, or the Bible is the inerrant, infallible word of God.
No, and I would hold to the idea that the Book of Mormon was inspired. Even if Joseph Smith made it up, he made the greatest story about Jesus. And like he essentially engaged in midrash and created a set of stories that draw people closer to Jesus. Like, yeah, that's awesome. Like, go Joseph. Like, the problem is that when you end up looking at it, it's just that the things that he's saying are true, whether or not his claims about where he got them from are true. And when you realize that, again, I've had this. It's like I'm in this weird position where I'm like so deep in this that even if you like, I've seen too much. Like, the Trinity isn't true, and this is the best version of Christianity that exists, regardless. And so it's the most true thing. And so unless people could, I mean, maybe I'd be more open to people convincing me out of that, but I'm open to that right now. Like, I'm open to being convinced otherwise. I'm here because I've been genuinely convinced by good arguments, by spiritual experiences, by the fruits that come from it. And so, if it's wrong, it's like, okay, well then I'd reject that, I'd have to accept the truth that like Joseph didn't see God or whatever, but I would still believe that in some way God influenced him to do something incredible. And I think there are a lot of Christians who get to know us that they wrestle with that, man. I think that Stephen Pineker's one. I think that Jeff McCullough is. They're like, man, this is really great.
Yeah, they're like, seeing the beauty of the restoration and of the church.
Yeah, and that's why they have to say, I think you guys are Christians, and I think you guys are going to go to heaven. And so in that case, I'm like, well, then why are you like, people should be stoked that people are Latter-day Saints. Be like, be a good Latter-day Saint, and you'll go to heaven. It's like, right on.
Love that. So, and you've been having discussions lately with so I saw you and Jim on their show, and then with Colby, and you even went out to dinner with John Delenn. Like, what's going on with it? You're usually this polemic, combative guy, and I was expecting you and Jim to, round 3, button heads, and you're building bridges. What's going on with you?
I'm getting soft, man.
Yeah, you are.
No, I honestly, I haven't changed a bit. I would say that my thing is this. Okay. I am a ruthless warrior for what's true, and am willing to defend that and fight for that and stand on it, because the truth freaking matters. Okay. And people who lie, who spread misinformation, that's not okay. It has to be confronted. But I'm just a believer that I'm supposed to love everybody. And every one of these people has a story. Every one of these people are going through things. And I never want to, and I'm not a perfect person. I mean, I will get angry and yell at people and call them stupid names and stuff. Like I'm mortal, sorry. But I am genuinely committed to the fact that everyone's a child of God, that everyone is going through stuff, that I don't want people ever to feel like my desire to just destroy their ideas. And I mean that in the most, like, I will drop a nuclear bomb on bad ideas, and I will not apologize for it for a moment. But at the same time, like, I don't want them ever to think that because I hate them.
Yeah, they're your enemy.
Love them. You're not my enemy. You're my brother, and you're my sister. And, I look at it like an MMA fight. Two guys will just beat the crap out of each other, and then they'll hug each other, because at the end of the day, it isn't personal. So the truth matters. I'm going to stand up for that. But John Delenn is a child of God. Alyssa Grenfell is a daughter of God. And they say some things that are really, really, really stupid and harmful. And I'm going to try and stand up to that.
I think what you're doing as well, like, I think with the debates you're having, the conversations you're having, particularly, with people of other Christian traditions, although people might perceive debates as being, combative or even contentious. One, I think we need to have more difficult conversations, or I think debates can be necessary and helpful. But it also seems that it's probably helping to build bridges in many
Oh yeah.
ways and to clarify things, but you probably have better relationships with people after. So I think what you're doing, and Hayden as well with his new channel, I actually have really enjoyed and found them really productive conversations.
Yeah, and I'm hoping that that's what my channel can do, and I hope others can kind of do that as well, and others are doing that. Where, again, that analogy of like we're stepping into the world of MMA doesn't mean you hate everyone. It
Yeah.
means that like we can fight with everybody. Like we can stand toe to toe. In fact, I think we can mop the floor with them. But we can do it in a way that at the end of it, you actually are better friends. And I genuinely like I am like friends now with Joe Heschemeyer and Cameron Bertuzzi. And before, like we weren't. And we have our disagreements. We'll still debate stuff all day long, but we like have a respect for one another. And I'm going to the Bless God Summit next month to do a debate with God Logic, and I've already kind of had a conversation with him before. But like I'm developing friendship with these people because people just respect people who step into the ring and who will steel man their side before they give a critique of it. And that's one thing too that I really do think. Debate is great, but if you haven't steelman the other side in its strongest terms and you don't really understand and aren't able to sort of articulate and address the strongest versions of the other side's position, you shouldn't be doing it. And that is something I've enjoyed doing. And I think people, when they see that someone has actually tried to address their actual arguments, there's a side to which you appreciate that. You're kind of threatened by it too. If somebody comes in and lays out a really good steelman on my position, they're like, and now let me tell you why I'm wrong. I'm like, oh crap. Like this guy might have some good points here. So yeah, I do think that these, as weird as it sounds, debate can actually build bridges.
Yeah, I think it is. And it's also introducing to a much larger audience in the broader Christian world and even atheists to learn more about Mormonism. Because in some of the discussions I've listened to with other Christians, some of them were like, I know sort of like all the, the common things people say about Mormonism, but actually we don't know too much. So it's a great way to actually, in a way, probably spread the gospel, or for people to just have more understanding about it. And I think like I wish we had more apologists or LDS scholars who were more inclined to have more debate or just more discussions. I think it's something that like there's some LDS scholars who are like experts in some of these things, and I feel like often they just stay in their echo chambers, and be it ex-members or people of other faiths, like I feel like there's less of a willingness to dialogue. And like I think it's great. I think you're really talented what you're doing, but I feel like it shouldn't have to be just Jacob Hansen going out and debating people. I wish that other people would step up who are scholars or have degrees or they're experts in a topic. Like why don't you go and debate or just have a discussion with a critic, someone from the other side. I feel like there needs to be more of that.
Oh, I agree 100%. I've the number one thing I've been saying ever since I started doing this is like, why me?
Yeah.
Why am I doing this? Like, I'm just reading the people and like the scholars and the people who really know what they're talking about. And then I'm going out and articulating their ideas.
Yeah.
And so it's like, why don't you guys do that? You guys are the experts. And so we have this weird thing where, I don't know. And there are reasons. It's kind of complicated, but
yeah.
I have found that whether it's them, whether it's others who use their ideas, the here's the big secret that I figured out, and that kind of I feel like is like my secret weapon. That's the reason my channel is growing and all that. And I want to tell Latter-day Saints this: like, we have an incredibly coherent theology when you compare it to every other theological model out there, like head and shoulders above it. Everything from the rejection of sola scriptura to the idea of the Trinity, like we are like amazingly above it in terms of like how easy it is to argue our case and how good our case is. Like the great apostasy, right? Like it's an easy argument to win. And it's sort of like, and I don't necessarily say we have to argue it always, but like people don't even know that. They've never heard it. And so it's really easy. I think I was talking to Blake Ostler the other day at my debate, and he said, well, it is helpful that our opponents have indefensible positions.
That makes it easier.
And it's true. It's like, I don't even think I'm that smart. The strength doesn't come because Jacob Hansen's so smart. It's because you guys, we have a really amazing theology. If you just learn it in depth and compare it to all the others, you go, oh my gosh, this is nuts. Like, why are these people laughing at us?
That's true. I know. I agree with Jim Bennett. I think gave a compliment to you that you're probably the best we have at the minute to have these interfaith discussions with other Christians or to debate. I think you're a very talented debater, and there's some people, you know, I've interviewed who they're experts, but you could tell like some people just wouldn't have the skills or wouldn't be part of their nature to do a debate. I don't think I'd be great in a debate, but I'd be better in like a discussion.
I actually, my general rule is don't debate.
Yeah.
Like, don't do that. And I do want to, I think one of the things I'd like to do in the future in my channel is try and work with people that are subject matter experts and others to teach them how to have better sort of the tactics of like how to engage in this sphere, right? Like, what's the difference between a conversation and a debate? Because if I do have a skill set, it's not that I'm really knowledgeable. It's that I sort of know the rhetorical games and the way that sort of works, right? I understand that questions and quotes are weapons. I understand that you never want to be talking about a subject that's too broad. I understand that you have to understand who you're going to talk to, and you have to make sure you understand that you know what they're going to say before you ever have a conversation with them or a debate with them. If it's going to become contentious and if it's not a person where you have high levels of trust. So like some of that is the game, but yeah, it's if you know, and it isn't even that complicated. Once you understand some of that, like you can do it, especially if you're an expert. Like if you're an expert,
yeah, you have the knowledge.
And you're talking about a subject you know a lot about, like, don't be worried. Like, you got this. And once you build a little confidence and you've done it a little bit, then it's like you can find all sorts of people to talk with about it. The cool thing about our online world is there are people literally out there looking to talk to subject matter experts on all sorts of things. And so you'll be able to do it. So,
well, cool. Well, Jacob, it's been fun having you on. I enjoyed your debates. I'll link it for people who haven't watched it, his debate with Joe Heschemeyer, and also the discussions he's had afterwards as well. And we'll have to bring you back at some point to talk about prophetic reliability and your collective witness model as well. That's a topic I want to dive into. So go check out his channel, Thoughtful Faith. If you've enjoyed this video, like, comment, share, subscribe, and I'll see you next time on Mormonism with the Murph. Take care. Thanks everyone for watching this episode. If you've enjoyed it, please give it a like, share it with others who might benefit, and don't forget to subscribe so you don't miss any future content. You can also listen to these episodes on podcast form on Anchor or Spotify, and you can follow me on Facebook, Instagram, and TikTok. Check out my website for more content, personal blog, and more. And if you care to donate to support me, you can via my PayPal or Patreon, or through the website. And you can also give donations via YouTube through Super Chats. Thanks for watching Mormonism with the Murph. Take care. Bye-bye.